Welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast, where we break down the practical strategies of this emerging science, starting with healthy light habits and going wherever the quantum superhighway takes us. This is your host, executive and life coach Meredith Oak, with a quick reminder that podcasts are conversations, not consultations, and definitely not medical advice. We're here for informational purposes only. To follow up with our amazing guests, please do check out the show notes, and to stay in the loop with the QBC podcast, join our email list, also linked in the show notes. In this episode, I have my friend Kelli Ritter, PhD, back on the podcast, and we are circling back to the topic of anxiety. I think this topic is worth revisiting, and I will stop visiting it only when I stop feeling it on a regular basis, and you all do too. There are so many different layers and levels to this, and Kelli walks us through sort of the traditional way that we've been taught to think about anxiety versus a more quantum way to think about it, which includes ideas that, stressed out mitochondria can cause us to feel afraid, cause us to go into fight or flight, and anxiety is like a frequency of that. So it's a very deep, holistic approach to understanding what's going on with what we call mental health. And Kelli is uniquely qualified to talk about this. And she's also putting together, at my request, a workshop that we give a little more info on at the end. But it's really this idea of empowering all practitioners to feel okay when confronted with trauma, not necessarily to be equipped to treat it. Although if you want to go down that road, that's not what the workshop is about. It's more just about knowing it when we see it and knowing what to do next and understanding it from a frequency perspective, not just a cognitive perspective. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Kelli. It does get a little personal because we are friends. So thank you for being here, and I trust you all. So I did not edit out the part where I cry a little. Okay. Have a great episode, everyone. Thanks for being here. Oh, don't forget to visit Bon Charge, QBC put QBC in the box at checkout. And do take a look at the red lights for bedtime reading. I know a lot of people get overwhelmed. I've had people be like, oh, this to your podcast, but it's the idea of changing all my light bulbs is scary. It's like, don't start with there. Just turn off the terrible lights and buy a little red reading light. Start with that. They have some great ones and lots of different options. Boncharge.com, QBC code, QBC in the code as the code at checkout for 15% off. Okay. Enjoy my chat with Kelli. Dr. Kelli Ritter, welcome back to the QBC podcast. I think you are my first 3-time guest. Maybe Carrie did 3 times, but I think you're the first. So
thank you.
Yes. Delighted to have you. I so enjoy our conversations / discussions / interviews. Never really, there's sort of it's a real potpourri here. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about anxiety, which is your specialty. And yep. You now at this point have a very thorough and expansive approach to helping people through this. And so my first question to you is, how do you understand anxiety now versus what you were taught in school? You have a academic background, you have a PhD in counseling. Mm-hmm. What were you taught from an academic perspective versus how you understand anxiety from at this moment in time?
Yeah, from a quantum perspective, which of course quantum just blows it wide open. So I've thought about this a lot lately because I feel like what I was taught was not wrong necessarily, not it can be helpful, but everything was very cognitive behavioral therapy focused. There was a little bit of other kinds of things. I was really interested in health psychology and some of the other fields. But I never really understood on a cellular level what was happening. Certainly was never taught anything about circadian rhythms being important in this picture. And at that time, we didn't even realize how important inflammation was. We weren't taught about inflammation contributing, and I don't think they're talking about that now when we're educating people. It's still kind of very antiquated in my opinion. And it's not that it's wrong, it's just not complete. Right? It's not a complete picture. And therefore, you get all of these therapists and counselors and social workers eager to help people. They go out into the world and then they realize they have enough tools to help people manage, and they can get really caught up in certain things and think it's helpful, but it's not actually curing anything. It's not really helping people fully recover from anxiety, which is where I've come now. Is like, I personally would not have believed. I thought I was doing all the things that you could do. I'm a big advocate of therapy and of eating really well, eating the nutritious foods. I thought that the nutrients, if you're missing certain nutrients, it will increase your anxiety. If you are dehydrated, it will increase anxious feelings. But what I did not realize is the influence of circadian rhythms and how mitochondria is actually creating that reactive oxygen species, which is inflammation, and how you can come at this in a lot of different directions. And you and I have talked about mindset, and I was like, mindset's great. It's not enough. It's not enough to help people fully recover. And you can absolutely fully recover from chronic anxiety. And I guess before I thought we were just managing symptoms, and I thought that was as good as it could get. Even though in me, I always was like, I think we're missing something. I think we're missing something. There's got to be something else. But now I also understand the field. So on the tiniest level, the subatomic, what's happening inside of our cells in the smallest way, and how that's driving the bigger picture. But then also from the other direction of we're actually working within a field. And I call it the mind field because I like that term. I didn't coin it. That was from Dr. Hunt, Valerie Hunt, who died in, I think, 2016 or something, and was amazing researcher on the biofield. And I think there's still so much for us to learn, but there's so much in that biofield that informs us that we don't realize is creating irritability, anxiousness, mood issues or mood swings that has to do with old trauma, old wounding, older stuff that we think either we are not aware of, it could be unconscious, subconscious, or so we're not aware of it, but we could also think we dealt with it. Like, oh, well, yeah, that happened, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Or we don't necessarily realize some of the stressors and the wounds that are actually still creating a frequency or blocking frequency within our field. And so that's where I'm going now. And it's fascinating. Yeah.
Wow. No, and this is a very, very cutting edge approach to this topic.
Yeah.
So going back to the old paradigm, or maybe the traditional paradigm of teaching about anxiety. So how did they define it? Was it just like, this is a disorder, you're caught in a negative thought loop, or how did they frame it?
Right. There was a lot of emphasis on thoughts creating feelings, which I disagree. I don't think we need to get into a war about thoughts and feelings and what comes first and all that anymore. But there was a big influence focus on our thoughts creating this, which isn't the whole picture. But also it was it became, not when I first started, but the movement in the field, which I get, it's about getting paid and being respected, became very much more a medical model, diagnosis. The DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, became, what everybody was using, and you needed to understand that. And I never personally found that helpful. I think it's the idea I get. It makes sense that you're going to give somebody a diagnosis. And if you get the correct diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, phobias, all of the different disorders that you can have, social anxiety, all of that, when you get a label, the idea is then you're going to get the right treatment. But I didn't ever see that happening. Like you might, and my thinking now is that when it does work, when we had things that work for people, it works because of frequency. And I would have never thought that. And I knew the relationship, there is a big...
Say more what you mean by that.
Okay, about if frequency.
It worked because of frequency.
Okay, I will. I definitely will.
Okay.
I just need to say that the relationship is really important too. So we'll circle back to that. I think that's what the field does well. And when it's the right relationship in terms of, which has to do with frequency, when you have a practitioner of any kind that has in their field, I know this is really woo-woo, but stick with me. This is frequency. When they have worked on themselves and they are healthy and their field is very vibrant and there aren't the breaks in the same places that you as the client have breaks, there is an exchange of healing. And so I think, are meant to help each other heal in this way, in this very vibrational frequency way. So just on a relationship level, when you have a practitioner that's a good match for you electrically, meaning that they are vibrant where you are weak, then there's an exchange and therapy can happen. Now, I believe that all healing is inner healing. So yes, you're working with a practitioner that can help you and there's a transfer there, but you have to actually be willing, open to accept that healing. And that healing has to come from within. But I think that's probably what's happening when it does work. And also in terms of frequency, some of the modalities that work on all the sensory motor stuff that's really popular now. So EMDR, brain spotting, tapping, havening, all of the things. I know what havening is doing because it's actually generating delta waves. We're purposely generating delta waves, which is frequency, right? EMDR. Right. You are actually the eye movements that we use in EMDR, they work with delta waves. You're generating delta waves. So the trauma got encoded. If you're using it for a trauma, let's just say the trauma got encoded by frequency, gamma brain waves. There's probably more to the frequency that's going on, but just on a brain level, that's what's happening, is that we have the gamma waves with the neurotransmitters that then are excitatory at the synapse. And what happens sometimes is that over stressors, they can flood the system and create this kind of glued situation where I don't want to give too many details about AMPA receptors and what's happening in the amygdala. But the point is you get in that frozen fright and the fight, flight, freeze response. And so now things will trigger that amygdala. The thalamus and the amygdala are like, oh, danger, danger, danger. But all of that is actually coming from frequencies. The brain is we're sending electrical frequencies to initiate that. And then the opposite is we're using frequency to what's called depotentiate that, which is reverse that. You can reverse that. And when I think about what works, nature, connection, feeling of oneness, feeling that social support and connection that we have, unity, whatever you want to call that, and also the frequency of love. And I know that sounds really woo-woo, but we're talking about literally on a basic level. You're either working with a frequency of fear or you're working with a frequency of love. And so my view now, which I was not taught, is that anxiety is just a fear frequency. And sometimes it can get stuck there. And it really is about danger signaling, rapid danger signaling. It's your body trying to tell you that it's out of balance, it's on fire with inflammation, and that it needs support and healing. So it's not a bad or good. It's just that it's communicating with you. And I always looked at it as a communication, but we were trying to work at things from chemically and behaviorally and cognitively, not frequency, not electrically.
Wow. So no, it's so fascinating. And okay, so yeah, there's a lot in there. I was smiling when you were talking about the level of like where the therapist, him or herself, is at in terms of frequency.
Right.
I recently started following on Twitter a therapist, and he made a post that was like, basically, if you're not willing to do the deep reflective work and meet your inner demons and go into the dark corners of your own self, you have no business being a therapist. And someone responded like, well, that's a high bar that you have to be a Zen master to do your job. And then I was like, no. So I don't usually jump in there. I got in the comments. I'm like, this is not about being a Zen master. It's just a choice, like to do reflective self-inquiry or not. And if you're a therapist and you're not doing it on yourself, but you expect your clients to do it, like you're already making a judgment.
Exactly.
Like which for you, but not for me.
Which doesn't make any sense. And I think I would take that to a quantum space too. I completely agree. And I don't think you have to be a Zen master, thank goodness. But you can only take people as far on a journey as you have been. So that's the thing. So as long as you're on the journey yourself, then you have people you can help, because that's how it works. But from a quantum perspective, he's not like, yeah, I did all that inner demon work, like looking for the inner demons and the blind spots. It doesn't even have to be that deep. Just looking for your own blind spots and being willing to do your own healing work. I did not realize what that meant on a quantum level. I didn't know that my mitochondria needed support. I didn't know that my doom flavor or anticipatory anxiety I thought that was just my disposition. I knew that I still had it, but I didn't realize that fixing my life to support my circadian rhythms, I didn't realize that supporting my mitochondrial health was also important. And I definitely did not think about that vibrationally and being more of a match for more people. Like, think of the people you can serve when you've healed on the subatomic level. Right? When you're really working with vibration and healing all the way from the tiniest particles inside of you all the way out into the field, that's pretty magical.
Yes. And when you were saying that the model that you were taught was not wrong, just incomplete, what I'm starting to learn is, that is sort of a piece of it, the negative thought loop.
Sure.
But yes, if our cells are communicating together all the time and our mitochondria are not receiving the signals that they need from the light, from the earth, from being in rooms on a regular basis where you feel safe and accepted and welcomed, right? Like how many people have places to go outside of their own homes where they're like, I feel like I belong here and people are happy to see me, right? Like things like that. All of this is stress on our mitochondria if it's not set up properly.
Correct.
And so you can do like all the thought work in the world, but but you need to be led down this path as well.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. If you want full recovery, and it's a choice. And if you want to help people on the deepest level, that's what we're at. That's what we're saying. Yeah, because it really is. And I think people are on the cusp of this. They get the nervous system is really important. They understand that there's danger signaling, but they're not always putting together all the pieces, and not so much in a trauma-informed way. But I feel like people are wanting this information, both practitioners and regular people, the rest of the world, right? I think people are hungry for this information. A lot of people are ready for it. Practitioners are saying, look, I've done all the training And people are definitely, I'm able to help people, but I'm after something more with my clients. And I think if they keep moving in that direction, this is where it leads.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes. And that this idea that we can heal as, fully as we want to at a certain point. Like that's what's really fundamental about this to me, right? It's like there's always another door to open.
Yes, you and I have talked about this many times, Meredith, on the podcast and off of there's always another door. And if you don't feel really vibrantly healthy, there's another door. I feel that way where I'm like, are you experiencing vitality on a regular basis? Do you have a real coherence, like a felt sense of safety? Do you have environments and places outside of your home where you can go and you feel included and safe? Because if you don't, then you're not done. then we're not done. And that's okay. That's part of the journey, but that means you're not done.
Yes. And it's interesting. Like I'm thinking of things that work really well, like AA meetings, right? Because like you're coming in, you're connecting with people who've strengthened something that is weak in you. You feel that sense of welcoming and belonging. Mm-hmm. There's like an energetic component to it, as well as, the inquiry component. Mm-hmm. So
exactly. The more you think about it, what does work for people and when it works, you're like, oh, that's frequency. Oh, that's frequency.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating. And it's a rabbit hole that I think some people are like, oh, that seems like one I don't want to go down, but it's really quite simple.
Yeah. And you're really good at laying it out. Like you say, oh, it sounds woo woo, but it really doesn't. Like you talk, the way that you approach it is very matter of fact. Like you're a very sensible person.
Right. I am pretty matter of fact. And believe me, when I was like, oh, wait, we're talking about frequency of love. Okay. There is a little bit of an eye roll for me. Mm-hmm. I was at first of like, really? I don't, and I've worked with that part of me that's kind of resistant to that. Like, what is that about? And I'm really into self-love. I no longer believe that self-love is an optional ingredient in anxiety recovery. I'm realizing it is a necessary component of anxiety recovery. And it took me a minute to be like, oh, wow, this is, but it's not woo-woo love. It's literally the frequency of love. That is the medicine. It's not woo-woo. It is exactly what we're after.
Right. Because in order to make those choices, I have to love myself, right? Like if I feel like I don't deserve to go somewhere where I'm wanted, right? Like how many of us, I saw some clip, if I could remember who said it or where, it just went by in my YouTube and I was like, whoa, that was good. And it was something like one of the biggest signs of trauma is that we are constantly pursuing difficult people and trying to get them to like us or get them to get along with us.
Right. Or to prove ourselves or something.
Yes. Versus like going to where people were. And then the people who welcome us were like, why are they welcoming me? I don't want
Exactly.
But if we left ourselves, we'd be like, why am I putting myself in this situation?
And honestly, one of the questions I've really started asking myself, because I started noticing with clients or even when I was interviewing people or talking about self-love, there's a look that people have. It's a little bit of a blank shock look or something. And then they immediately start talking about self-care as if they're connected. And to me, it's different. Self-love is much deeper. And one of the questions I started asking myself when I was like, well, I don't know even, I mean, I think I love myself, sure. But is when I'm in difficult situations or when I am putting myself in a situation that doesn't feel good. And then it's beating up on myself instead of that to go, how could I love myself through this? Or when I display an old pattern that I'm like, how did I do that again? Where I know that's not even who I am anymore. Why did I do that? And then I just immediately will say, wait, how can I love myself through this? And it's it's an internal process. So while, yeah, self-care is kind of loving on yourself, it's very external focus mostly. It could create some inner, but self-love is really truly an inner experience. And it is tapping into that frequency of love that is always available to us. It is never cut off from us. But I've realized, particularly with certain traumatic experiences, we cut ourselves off from it. Or we start questioning, could it really be, or it's not for me, or in certain situations, I don't deserve. That kind of feeling and thought pattern blocks us from that frequency of love that is always available to us.
Right. You need to allow it.
Yeah.
And it can feel nonsense. It can feel like, what are they saying? Like, what? But yeah, it's those moments where I'm like, no, I need to, I'm in a difficult situation. And then it's like, wait, why did I create this? And I don't just mean like in a manifesting sense. I mean, like I literally planned out. I planned for all of these things. And now here I am like, wait, what? This wasn't very fair or kind to myself. And I have all of the, all of these pressures and obligations with challenging people. And it's like, why did I pick that?
Right. Well, and we could go.
Yeah, we could go on and on. But I did want to circle back where you talked about the good fit, a therapist.
Yeah.
Where it's the relationship that heals, because I had that experience, and I had it with the very first therapist I ever went, or the first therapist where I ever seriously went to.
Okay. Right.
And it was kind of by chance. Like I mentioned to someone like, oh, I'm getting married. I want to do some like premarital stuff. And she was like, that's a good, she did not. She wasn't like, oh, really? She's like, oh, good. You should. she like gave me this phone number. And I ended up in the office of this woman who had like, I don't know, 35 years experience. She was at the end of her career. I got the last 5 years before she retired. She'd been around the block a million times. And she helped me so much. And it was because she modeled a way of being. And because of the age gap, she could fulfill certain archetypes, right? Mm-hmm. And she modeled a way of being and a way of relating that I had never experienced. And yes, she told me some things and she gave me some handouts on cognitive behavioral therapy that were very helpful. But that's where the healing was. And so even when crisis moments had passed, I still went back to her, and people were like, why are you still going? And I was like, because this relationship is important to me. Mm-hmm. And I need that. And, because she created that relationship with me, she could tell, when I needed to hear something rough, she could say it, and I didn't feel destroyed because we had such a solid foundation, which I now see as the same thing that happens with my teenage children. Yeah. Right. It's like when I need to drop the hammer, and I think I'm acting like my mother, and I swore I never would. But the difference is like, I'm like, oh, my mother wasn't wrong. It's just she said hard things, but there was nothing else to fall back on.
Right. There wasn't the trust and the foundation of that trust and safety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I learned that from a therapist, right? Yeah. Like this is possible.
Exactly. So that's why I'm saying we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. It was what you were saying. It was her ability to relate to me, her strengths, even when we didn't really talk that much, just being in the room with her. Exactly. She would be like, I had my first child, and she'd be like, bring the baby. And she'd watch, and we just hang out. And then at the end, she'd be like, your baby's securely attached. I was like, oh, thank you. Right? Just like these little moments.
Those moments are huge. In building that safety and trust. Oh, yeah. I know I have those moments every day, Meredith. Where
that baby went to college 2 weeks ago. So
that's the thing, right? I get that. I'm passing little children now and tearing up because I'm like, oh, I remember. So I I so relate to where you are right now in that story. And it's beautiful. And I think that is because there's an exchange there, and it's a correct therapeutic bond that can happen. So I think that piece is really important. And I was going to ask too, like, from a coaching perspective, I think that's what happens in good coaching as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? It's more of a being able to be present and model something. And actually you've lived enough and lived some experiences and have worked on your vibrational health enough to be able to help people in an area where they're weak. And if we don't, at the very basic level, first order of business when you do anything around trauma informed is safety, stability, and trust. And I think, that's what's important to keep whatever profession you're in. And then you up level.
Yes.
And then you up level from there.
Up leveling forever.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So true. Yeah, that's a great point about the coaching. Like therapy and coaching are different, but the fundamental relationship is what's key. And coaching is more like goal focused, and therapy is more processing.
Yeah. And I think, I've become really passionate about helping coaches because coaches are already helping people with their mental health. They just maybe, they don't want to be therapists. They don't, and that's totally fine, but they have a really important role to play in helping people because you can't separate physical, mental, emotional, like there's no separating that out of a whole person. So I've become really passionate about that lately.
Oh, I'm so glad. And it's great because like, a lot of coaching is focused more on the cognitive model, right? Like I have a method of inquiry that it's very much about analyzing your thoughts that I personally found really helpful, but it's, as you said, it's a piece. And I also noticed, like for me, I found like the work of Byron Katie, and there's another person who did like a similar, it's called The Model, where it's about like, sort of breaking down your thoughts and questioning them. Like, is that really true? And all that stuff. And when I first came across that I was like in my journal, like every day, like frantically, like I was like in it. And I think we've talked about this, but what I noticed over the years is I would recommend that approach to other people. And sometimes they would have the experience I did. And other times they'd be like, I don't understand what this is asking me to do. Like it made no sense to them. So it can't be the only approach because it does not.
Different modalities for different folks and different issues. Yeah. A great tool to have in your toolbox. And I think certainly helpful. And I use it too. I just used it last week where I was like, is that even true? Like, what are you saying to yourself? So I think there's time and a place, and developmentally too, there are times in our lives, not necessarily chronologically, but times in our life, seasons in our life where that's the necessary tool, a piece of the puzzle.
Yes. And then before we wrap up, I want to mention, first of all, that Kelli has a workshop coming up going into all of this for practitioners, for coaches, or just for anyone. If you found this conversation, you want to be like, I want to dig down into this. Kelli's, I recommend this workshop. It's just like half a day coming up on October 4th.
Right.
And so I also just wanted to touch on a topic that you talked about on your podcast, which is when you see people who don't even realize that they're living in anxiety, right? Like it's just like the sky is blue, the grass is green, and this is how I feel. I don't know I'm fine. I'm good. It's all good.
Yeah.
So what's my question here, right? It's just to know that to know that exists. It's like, is that me? Is that my client?
Yeah.
How do we move forward when it's like not even a conscious awareness?
Right. Because that kind of insight, I believe we can have healing without having the insight, but It's a much more direct approach if you do have some insight. And I kept seeing it over and over with clients that would come for gut health, and they're terrible gut health, all kinds of issues, but no, mental health is good. No anxiety. And they're some of the most anxious people I've ever been around.
Really?
Yeah.
But when you asked them, are you experiencing anxiety? It was like, no.
Oh, no,
I'm
no.
fine.
Yeah. And lots of people, friends and people that you talk to are like, oh, yeah, people know, a lot of people do know. They're like, oh, no, I deal with anxiety. But there are a lot of other people. They tend to be these people who are very driven, a very kind of that type A. And it's almost like it's woven so much into their personality to be kind of high strung. They aren't even realizing, they know they overreact sometimes to things, but they don't even recognize that that's related to anxiety. They have no idea that their sleep being awful, their digestive issues, that a lot of their brain fog, which, I mean, we can relate to mitochondrial health, but they have no idea that that's anxiety. And they would never call it that. And I found the same thing with trauma too. It's even practitioners would say to me, they come to me usually for gut health. People would, that was my thing for a while before now. And they would come to me and say, she's having all these problems with her gut. And I'd say, what's the trauma history? Oh, no trauma. Who doesn't have a wound? Like, that's what the word trauma means, is wound. Like, who doesn't have a wounding? I know what people think, what they mean when they say that isn't. And when people say, no, I'm good, I don't have any anxiety. But then when you dig a little bit and you're like, oh, okay, so how's your sleep? Oh, not great, hit or miss, wake up a lot. They think that's normal. So when you wake up in the morning, how do you feel? Really sluggish, a lot of brain fog, have to have a couple cups of coffee to get myself going, all of those kinds of things. Very irritable at times, impatient with loved ones, putting a lot of pressure on themselves. And they think that if that's part of their success is by being driven and stressed all the time, that's what creates the outcomes that they want. They have absolutely no idea that that's their body with full of inflammation, giving them signals that it doesn't have the right inputs. It's danger signaling all over the place. And they, and even when I, with my son, I was trying to work on chronic health issues. I didn't even realize that the chronic health issues were because of the unaddressed anxiety. I, with all of, I say it like that, with like 30 years in the business, so I get why people get really focused on the symptoms and the chronic health issues, the fatigue and the digestive issues and all of those things. And they're trying to solve that, but not realizing, not going far enough into the root of what's happening. And that's fear signaling that's happening. And from a quantum perspective, we know why that's happening.
Right.
Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yes. And I think, I think that trauma is a scary word, right? Like, I'm a coach. I'm like, if someone asked me, I'd be like, nope, I do not do trauma work. Like, I have worked with traumatized people, but not on purpose. Right. Like, that was not our goal. It was in the process. I'm like, oh, okay. And so what I think is going to be so helpful, and thank you for doing this workshop with us, is to take that fear out, right? So if as a coach, like someone does show up, and I do a lot of group coaching, right? And so you go through and it's like people are like this and this and this and this, and you get to someone and it's like this, like an abyss opens up. You're like, oh, okay. They're in a completely different place than the rest of the group. Like, what do we do? So thank you for putting this workshop together, because I feel like you're going to give us a bit of a roadmap for that.
Yeah, I mean, that's my hope too. I'm really excited about it. And it's really going from trauma aware and just knowing that people have it to being more trauma informed about. So the first part of it's going to be, kind of educational, but a lot of really practical. I really want this to be practical for people, and when to refer, like but to have confidence in whatever you do, because I don't care who you're working with. You could be in the middle of working with someone. I was working with this cute little family, and then the mother of the family, her nephew was killed. Like now you're doing like there's no you're like, no, I don't do loss work. No, I don't do grief work. No, I don't do trauma. If you're working with people, this is what happens. This is, you don't get to say, so yes, you want to be clear. I'm not a trauma specialist. I'm not trauma. We're not trying to make people trauma competent in a day workshop. I'm just wanting people to have more confidence about being trauma informed in their practice.
Right. So that when it comes up, because it will. Mm-hmm. Like, how do we move through it and make sure that that person gets what they need?
Right. And there's a lot we can do in terms of resourcing in quantum health. So that's what's really exciting. And I want to share all of that.
I love it. That would be absolutely helpful. Because back to your point about people thinking like, oh, I've done so much work, I'm good. Right. If as a coach, I'm trained and I meet someone and they're like, no, I've done all my trauma work. I've done so much. And you're like, yeah, you need more, right? Like, how do I even say that? I'm not going to be the one to provide it, but I'm the one giving the message that it's needed.
Right.
And that's what I'm very looking forward to learning with you.
Good. Duly noted.
I'll be there.
Yeah, I'll be there. We'll be there. And I'll make that note that we're going to make sure that we address that. It's perfect.
All right. Thank you, Kelli.
Thank you, Meredith.
Any last thoughts anything dangling in your mind that you want to say before
really
we wrap?
Covered it. What's dangling in my mind is how much I enjoy these conversations and that I'm so grateful for this community and for you and to be able to feel safe in your presence is really a blessing.
Thank you, Kelli. Mm-hmm. Well, and I feel safe in yours, as you can tell by my tearful moment, remembering my baby daughter.
Self-love, lots of gentleness. It's an interesting transition.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Woohoo! You made it to the end of another episode. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploratory adventure into new realms. Your energy and support are building a different world, and I am so grateful to be on this journey with you. Take care, and thanks.